Hey, how's it going, guys? This is your boy Hazzed, and in today's video we're on the Battle for Azeroth Alpha, gonna be covering Covenant abilities and discussing what are the strengths and the overall weaknesses of these abilities coming into the new expansion. Now down in the comments below, I want you guys to tell me which one of these you are most excited to play and for what reason. So let's go ahead and jump into this video and do this. The first covenant that we're going to be talking about is Night Fae. Now, the first ability that I want to talk about is called Soul Shape. Now, this ability is kind of interesting. It kind of enhances mobility. So basically what it does is it turns you into a Vulpin, which is a little fox, and it teleports you 15 yards forward and increases your movement speed by 50%. So it's like a nice little mobility buff going on while you're a little fox. It does make you run a bit faster, and of course in the Maw, you are unable to actually mount in there. So an extra little bit of mobility at certain times does help you quite a bit when in terms of questing, getting to your next quest mobs, or, you know, trying to unlock a cage before another class just because you're simply faster, because you have this covenant instead of one of the slower covenants. So it does give you a little bit of enhanced mobility just in terms of generally doing things. Now in Mythic Plus dungeons, or just dungeons in general, I could see this ability being used to avoid mechanics and also get to the next pull of ads quicker. Now if something we remember from BFA or Legion on a Frosty K is generally, it feels like, let's say you have a demon hunter in the group with you, he just flies into the next pull. The tank, let's say it's a brewmaster, it's a warrior, something with heroic leap or charge or things like that, we would tend to fall behind. Well, with Soul Shape, obviously it'll give us a little bit more mechanical speed at 1.5 minute cooldown, and generally we'll be able to get to, let's say, the ads just as fast as any other class, being that we can teleport forward, and of course we get 50% movement speed. And I'm not 100% sure if you could actually combine this with Death Advance to run even quicker, which we'll test out just for the lulz here in a bit just to see if it actually works. So in those cases in PvE, I could definitely see this being used, and also in PvE, if you, let's say, use this while running in on a boss, it would allow you to reach the boss quicker than, let's say, the other DPS, so you would be able to slightly dwarf their DPS off the opener using this as some kind of like mobility gain, which would be pretty cool. But that's about as far as it goes in terms of PvE stability or strength with this ability. Now I know there's something you can take that allow you to heal also while this ability is activated. I'm pretty sure it's like 5% health every couple of seconds or so. So that is quite a bit of healing you could also get during this. You could like kite out classes and things like that, or kite out quest mobs while spamming chains on them to get a little bit more healing off if you need the survivability. That could also be a possibility. But that's about, I think, as far as it goes in terms of PvE mechanics on there. As far as PvP mechanics go on Soul Shape, chasing specific classes that have a lot of mobility, such as casters, I could definitely see this being a thing. But one of the main issues with this is obviously you're turning into an animal, so you're not going to be able to actually function during that. You're not going to be spamming chains, you're not going to be generating runic power, and that really kind of just makes it kind of terrible, because one of the other sides, if you don't have the healing from it, or you're not spec'd into that through your covenants, is you're going to get, let's say you get stunned in there, you get hodged by a rep paladin, or you get, you know, kidneyed by a rogue. That would be very bad to get caught inside of that and just getting laid up by somebody's burst while being caught inside, let's say, the Vulpin shape. Obviously it would render it completely useless at that point. But I do actually find it, you know, fairly cool just, you know, run around and use it. We'll go ahead and throw it up. Turns us into this little guy. We teleport. We run around. We're pretty happy. We can use it again to teleport and just kind of zoom around. Now you can see the cooldown running down. Transformed into your Soul Shape, increasing movement speed by 50%. And we can't use, it must be undead, so I can't actually use Death's Advance after being in it because obviously you're undead. Now I'll wait for this cooldown to come back off because I do want to use it one more time to test out one more thing with it. If we could throw up Death's Advance before and then use it. If not, I can understand, but it says you need to be undead to use it. So am I undead all the time now as a DK? I don't 100% know, but that is kind of odd that it just kind of does that. Now you can see, obviously, losing control of your character and not be able to function, that's going to be a huge no-no inside PvP, because you're going to get played pretty hard if you're just kind of running in that, and like, you know, a caster sees you running at him and that, he knows he's going to have XO amount of time to lay in burst on you. Now you could shift out of it and, let's say, kick or generate runic power. Let's say I wouldn't even use it against like a BM hunter unless I needed to, like I was going to set up burst. But overall, I don't see it being very good for Frosty K's. Like in a lot of situations, I don't see it being very viable. Now, if let's say you wanted like hard switch targets and it was a quite mobile target, it could be beneficial. But overall, I'm not seeing a huge benefit of this talent inside of PvP situations, especially because one of the other talents or covenants you could use is actually, you know, anti-mobility, which ends up being a lot stronger than this ability would be. So let's go ahead and use Death's Advance first and then use this. Now you can stack them up a little bit, but I don't really see it being a big damage increase or speed increase here. I still kind of feel like I just got that normal 50%. Yeah, it fell off and speed didn't seem to change actually at all, so that's kind of depressing to see that it doesn't actually stack with other movement speed abilities. So that's about where this covenant lines up in my opinion for PvP. Not the greatest thing, but still, I mean, it is pretty cool. I mean, it's really just, to me it feels like it just, you know, lifting up your average, you know, doing whatever, questing, anything like that makes it slightly faster, but in terms of PvP, meh. Now let's talk about the next one. Now this is where Night Fae actually kind of becomes strong, is with the ability Death's Due. Now Death's Due replaces your Death and Decay ability, which, I mean, in terms of PvE is completely useless because it really does like no damage at all. But obviously when you take Night Fae, it turns it into Death's Due, which does make it a lot better. Now, corruptions on the target ground cause 670 shadow damage over 10 seconds. That's really just like very little damage. Not really anything at all. Not really something I'd really care about. Not really something anyone should really care about. But, okay. Okay, we'll talk about that later. We'll talk about that later. While you remain within the area, your Obliterate will hit up to one additional target and inflicts Death's Due for 12 seconds. Now this is pretty cool. Death's Due reduces the damage an enemy deals to you by 1% up to a maximum of 8%, which could be a nice little damage reduction. Let's say, like, you know, mobs doing some AO cleave damage or something like that and you get caught in something you shouldn't. That could actually help you stay alive a little bit, but outside of that, not very great. Now the nice part is when you deal oh yeah, it transfers the strength to you, so that damage reduction of Death's Due reduces the damage of the enemy to you, also transfers over to a strength increase after using the ability, which is actually really cool. Like, that extra damage increase will definitely hold you over to deal a little bit more DPS, but I don't know, 8% is pretty good. Like, it is pretty good. There ain't no arguing with that. Now, the one thing that we like about this target, or this ability, obviously, is while you remain within the area, your Obliterate will hit up to one additional target and inflicts Death's Due. Now, that right there, inflicting an additional target is what makes this ability really strong. Like, Obliterates hit so hard during burst, and of course if you're playing, let's say, the Obliteration spec, your Obliterates are your bread and butter. They are like a massive, huge chunk of your damage, like absolutely enormous. So that being said, being that it's on a 30-second cooldown, getting Cleaving Obliterates on a 30-second cooldown inside of like Mythic Plus scenarios or Dungeon scenarios is going to be crazy strong. Especially if you combine it with Pillar and, let's say, Empowered Rune Weapon, so you just have endless amounts of Obliterates to throw on the target and you never really run out of runes during that, and you're just going to deal an insane amount of burst pressure, which I'll go ahead and show you guys right now. Now the one thing you need to remember about this is when you want to hit something with Obliterate, now this ability has a 10-second last 10 seconds Death's Due. Pillar lasts 15 seconds, so obviously you're going to throw Pillar first. You're going to hit him with, let's say, a Howling Blast to get yourself some kind of Obliterate proc. You're going to need that big old crit for this, and then you're going to go ahead and throw down Death's Due on the target, which is going to allow your first big Obliterate you lay on the target to cleave, and in which case hopefully you either get a Howling Blast proc, or if you don't, you could obviously, I mean, if you're using Glacial Advance to apply Razor Eye stacks, you could throw that in for another proc, which would be quite a bit more AoE cleave than, let's say, using Frost Strike. And then you could lay in another massive Obliterate, which again would increase your damage by a large margin. I'm going to go ahead and throw that on there just because I feel like that would be more fun for this scenario. Where should I put it? I don't know. We'll just put it right there for now. Alright, so we're going to open up on this target and show you guys exactly what I'm talking about. So you'd throw up Pillar first, you'd throw up Remorseless Winter. You could proc those at the same time, or you could wait until slightly after to proc Pillar if you're really picky about that 1 second cooldown. Now obviously we're going to throw up our big cooldowns here. We're going to throw in our Howling Blast on the target. We're going to throw in Death's Due, and that's when you drop your big Obliterate and just cleaving both the targets, dealing massive damage. Now I didn't get a Obliterate proc, so I'm going to throw in that Razor Ice stack in there for even more damage, and oh my gosh, does this just cleave for so much DPS. Now as you can see there in cleave damage, your Obliterate's actually hitting so hard that it was dealing well over 60% of your damage, landing at cooldowns like that with the Night Fae ability. Now that is just In terms of like Mythic Plus overall strength, that is power. That is extreme power. As you can see, it's only on a 30-second cooldown, so it's already back up. So I'm throwing that thing down. I'm coming out with more obliterates. Now obviously the obliterates aren't hitting nearly as hard, because if you do line it up with Pillar, it is going to deal a lot more damage with guaranteed obliterate crits. Now the other thing you got to remember with a two-hander is there is some downtime. So if you do actually pull, let's say, either runic power or some runes during the time you're going to throw down the Night Fae and pop Pillar, it would actually deal quite a bit more damage. And just overall, in terms of Mythic Plus strength, it's extremely powerful. Like, this thing is beast mode in comparison to the other ones when it comes to Mythic Plus pressure. Like, that's just, it's actually insane. Like, it almost makes me want to make 2 DKs so I could have 2 Covenants that I could, you know, swap to whenever I want to do, you know, let's say PvP content, and then one that I could do like PvE content, just because of how powerful this Covenant ability really is inside of like PvE scenarios. Now, in terms of PvP, a lot of people are kind of wondering between this and obviously Abomination Limb, which one's going to be better. Now, the one thing you need to remember about this ability, even though it does a ton of burst pressure, the one thing you're losing when you don't go Abomination Limb is your setup. You're not going to have your setup. You're not going to have the mass grip. So at that point, you're going to have to rely on something else to allow you to set up bursts, especially if you're using, let's say, something like Chill Streak. And that being said, you're going to need, let's say, Demon Hunter Stun, kind of like what the meta was back in Battle for Azeroth, if you're going to resort to using something like this. Because you're going to have to DPS the target, you're going to have to find the off target, you're going to have to grip them in. That's when the stun comes in. That's when you start doing that big AoE damage. That's when you're going to throw down Death's Due. And you're going to resort to using those big obliterates on the 2 targets in front of you to deal massive cleave damage to both of the targets, which is a lot. Now, the one thing you got to remember is it's completely going to rely on this setup to really benefit from this. Because if you're, let's say, popping this at random, being that it is Death and Decay, and the targets will be slowed as a Frost Decay, but the majority of targets do have quite a bit of mobility. And of course, let's say they have the Night Fae ability where they can turn it into a Vulpira too. You're going to throw down Death and Decay on them, right? And they're going to hit this button, and guess what? No cleaving obliterates, right? Now, okay, we could talk about other classes, Mage Blink, you have Hunters disengaging, things like that would really just absolutely kill the damage and the cleave damage you would gain from this ability. Like, not only do you have to have 1 target, but you would also have to have 2 targets to benefit from this. And obviously in single target DPS, this ability is only really going to be for the dot damage, because, you know, if you only got 1 target, the cleave, it doesn't really do much. But you will get the 8% strength increase, which is still fairly good when it comes to single target. Now, obviously the big issue that we're going to be facing with this is that the mobility thing. Like, it requires you and the other target to stand in it, and without being able to do, or like without being able to control the targets, the 2 targets, it's going to be extremely hard to get off. It's going to have the same problems as, let's say, Chill Streak does in PvP, being that it requires a setup to actually, of course, proc on the target, which is a major issue, as you guys remember, through Battle for Azeroth. And that's why a lot of us, we like Chill Streak, but we also hate it at the same time, because, like, it felt good when it went off, but, you know, the other 60% of the time when there wasn't a target standing next to the thing you're hitting, it's not very good. Now, obviously, in PvP, that's why Abomination Limb becomes so powerful. So let's go ahead and talk about the next Covenant ability. Next up, we are talking about the Necrolords. The first ability we need to talk about is called Fleshcraft. Now, this one's pretty cool. You form a shield of flesh and bone over for 4 seconds that absorbs damage equal to 20% of your maximum health for 2 minutes. Now, that is quite a bit of a shield, and the more corpses that are on the ground around you when you use this ability will allow you to make the shield even bigger. So in Mythic Plus dungeons or PvE scenarios where there is a big pile of adds around, you could use this, and it would definitely grant you quite a bit more survivability, and let's say surviving through boss mechanics or just add damage or cleave damage in general. Now, as you can see, it lasts 2 minutes, so it lasts actually a really long time, and being that the ability itself is on a 2-minute cooldown, if you're able to use this on a large enough ad pack, you could definitely keep it up almost permanently inside of dungeon scenarios where there's probably going to be a lot of ads laying on the ground after you've killed them. And outside of the overall basic survivability inside of PvE scenarios, there is one more use you can go into. It has to do with, like, the Covenant talents, you can spec into something that allows you to avoid CC 2 seconds after using the ability. So where could that fall into play? If the boss has some kind of massive stun that he's going to hit everybody with, let's say there's a soul thorn that's going to pop out of the ground and hit you, and you know it's going to hit you for some odd reason, you could definitely avoid the CC that way. But outside of that, I don't really see too much uses for this ability for DPS other than simple survivability, and of course avoiding some kind of CC if you manage to know when they're going to use that ability. Maybe a little bit of DBM help, something along those lines could definitely help you avoid some kind of CC in PvE scenarios. Now when it comes to PvP, this ability it's pretty cool. Obviously, it's going to give you a little bit of like head start at the start of the duel. You're going to start off the duel, you're going to fight some people, you're going to take quite a bit of damage, it's going to fall off. At that point, it's not really that great. And being that there's actually a cast time involved with it, it is fairly hard to get off a full flesh craft unless it's at the start of the duel. But there are times during a duel, let's say dueling a Ret Paladin when they bubble, that I would cast flesh craft to grant myself a little bit of absorb shields during the fight. Or let's say you fight a rogue that re-stealths. There will be times where you could in combat use this ability to enhance your overall defensives and make you survive a little bit longer than you previously would. Now obviously in PvP you can go off and kill a bunch of PvE ads, run up on somebody in Elwayne with a massive absorb shield, and actually do quite a bit better than you would without it. So there are a few ways that you can make this talent pretty strong in PvP scenarios to make it pretty good. Now we obviously explained with the PvE side of it that you can avoid CC with it. That becomes a very interesting factor, because this talent can go from being kind of mediocre in PvP to kind of being less effective to actually being pretty strong if you can time your fleshcraft with a CC. So let's say someone's about to hodge you, you're about to get feared, something along those lines. You throw this up, you avoid the CC, and you just go along with your day not being CC'd or not being killed, which would be really cool. Let's say times that you could use that. Fleshcraft the moment a smoke bomb hits you. Now obviously moving out of smoke bomb will probably be your best course of action, but imagine if for 2 seconds the rogue couldn't CC or hold you still in the smoke bomb. Most likely he would kick it, you'd be silenced, but you still wouldn't be in CC, and you'd gradually make your way outside of the smoke bomb. Some interesting ways you could definitely benefit from using fleshcraft in PvP. But overall, a little bit more survivability, same thing with PvE, and of course the ability to avoid CC definitely would help in PvP a little bit. But you would have to be really, really good at kind of telling what somebody was about to do to you to really use this to its maximum potential. Now as for the second ability, now this is kind of like the bread and butter of Necrolords, Abomination Limb. In PvE, this could actually be a very beneficial ability, being that it grips targets in. Being that, let's say you focus on one thing, you've got a tank that doesn't really AoE pull very well, it's not a Death Knight, it doesn't have a mass grip, let's say a warrior. Now a warrior's got, let's say, a DPS in the front, like, let's use these as an example, it's gonna punch me in the face. But let's use this as an example. You're DPSing on this ad because it's a kill target, you gotta catch the kicks, otherwise it's going to murder you. This thing's murdering me anyways, it's hitting so hard. But let's say these 3 ads over here are casters, and you want to cleave, because obviously in Mythic Plus scenarios, cleaving down all the ads is going to be the fastest way to clear the key. Which throwing up Abomination Limb in Mythic Plus scenarios is going to obviously pull those ads over to you. You can see it's hitting some of those ads, gripping them over. I'm staying away from that thing. That thing hits really hard. But just having the mechanical ability of being able to grip ads to the tank, and then having the entire group being able to cleave those ads, obviously a lot of AoE is maximum of 5 targets, will be very beneficial to you and the group. Now also being that there's a legendary ability, or a legendary item is a Frost DK that you can take that'll allow you to reduce the cooldown of Frostworm's Fury by half, so it's a 1.5 second cooldown instead of a 3-minute cooldown, would be highly beneficial to this ability, because you'd be able to stack up all the ads, pop pillar, and then lay out a massive dragon on all of them to deal quite a bit of overall DPS, which sounds pretty cool as a Frost DK, I'm not gonna lie. It would also be very beneficial if you were using something along the lines of Frost Scythe, or even Glacial Advance overall would deal more pressure while dripping in all the targets to a centralized area instead of having them all spread out over the Mythic Plus scenario. So that would definitely be a very strong talent under those circumstances. Now in raids, it could also be beneficial, because I've also known, you gotta like tank bosses, And then adds come, and then you got to grip the adds in. If there was a Frost DK or multiple Frost DKs using Abomination Limb, they could throw that up, grip that add in, tank it easily, taunt it, and there the add would be to obviously cleave it down with the boss, dealing quite a bit of overall DPS and PvE. So that is definitely kind of like the beneficial parts of Abomination Limb. Now it does deal a little bit of damage. I wouldn't really say it's massive damage, but in terms of like having quite a few mobs in front of you, quite a few, you know, like all these training dummies here, quite a few things to hit, it does deal quite a bit of damage. I will say it's within like your top 3 on opening up on a target if you throw it up, so it does do fairly well. It's not as overpowering as obviously the Night Fae Obliterate Cleave, which is really strong, but it does come with mechanical stability in PvP that can't be argued with, even after the recent nerf being that you can only grip a single person once every 4 seconds. Just a single extra grip is extremely overpowered. I've seen people try to like weigh the power of each of these abilities from like a scale of 1 to 4, and I've seen some be like 3 and some be like 4, but the major issue that I see there is they're not explaining exactly how far ahead this ability is from other talents when it comes to like PvP scenarios, because as I said before, just having one extra grip is extremely overpowered. Now if it was gripping every 2 seconds or whatever it was doing originally, where it was like machine gun gripping the living crud out of people, that wouldn't be fun for anyone, being that it would literally take casters that have to cast things almost out of combat completely if that DK just decided to run away. It also caused healers not to be able to cast. Like that would just be completely busted at that point if you were able to just absolutely lock out those people inside of arena. It would just make DK so overpowered that they would be nerfed into the ground just because of the strength of that one ability, and that's not something anybody obviously wants. But that being said, it does give another very good ability. As you saw there, I got a Howling Blast proc off of the start of using Abomination Limb. Now obviously when this procs off and it hits somebody, it's going to grant you a Howling Blast proc, which allows you to go straight into your big obliteration crits, and it really lines up your DPS perfectly, which is really what you want with this, because the other beneficial side of this in PvP is going to be granting you your Chill Streak setup, which is something we were just talking about earlier. Using Night Fae, it wasn't going to be nearly as good. So you mass grip people in, you blow your cooldown, it's going to give you a free Howling Blast, and of course you're going to get your Chill Streak, you're going to toss that in there, and if something runs away every 4 seconds, it's going to pull it back, which really does give you quite a bit of burst. Now obviously if you have AoE stuns or something like that you can set up with this, it's going to make it quite a bit stronger, as we've talked about before. But imagine gripping all 3 targets in and then being capable of stunning. Then they run away, but they get gripped right back into your DPS. That is just absolutely insane. That kind of PvP mechanical strength can't really be weighed. It's extremely powerful in terms of arena. As you guys have saw on that video I posted, I believe it was yesterday, it was arena PvP video. The ability was extremely powerful even in that video, even after the nerf. So I don't really see the nerf as being, obviously it's a bad thing that we got a little bit weaker because of that. But overall, the strength wasn't nearly as affected as a lot of people are trying to make it out to be. And I really feel like this talent in PvP is still going to be extremely powerful overall. Next up, we got Venthyr the Vampires. Now, I was kind of intrigued by these guys, being that they have some interesting abilities, but overall, I did feel like, in comparison to the other 2 that we've reviewed for Frost DKs, this was more suited to, let's say, some kind of a tank or something along those lines. And being that it gives you a teleport, I did see an increase of overall mobility and, let's say, PvP status. Now obviously in PvE you could also use this to teleport to the boss, to the next group of ads, kind of like the whole little Kyrian Tor intro we had with the little fox in the earlier part of the video. Now overall the teleport is pretty good. It would give you a little bit of mobility, but I do feel like it's not nearly as good as the first 2, being that it doesn't give you any kind of speed increase. It's not consistent, and it's a one-time use thing. So you could teleport to a mage, the mage blinks, you're kind of just left out in the shadows, you don't got the speed increase, and you don't got another grip coming out of your butt like an Abomination Limb. So it does turn out to be kind of lacking in comparison to the other 2 mobility choices you could choose. So I would definitely have to say in both PvE and PvE, it can be a pretty good ability, but overall I wouldn't say it's nearly as good as the other 2. Now it does have a less of a cast time, obviously, but I don't really prefer it over the other 2, to tell you the truth. Like, it just seems kind of lacking compared to the other ones. Not really nearly as good. What would make it better? Maybe not having a cast time, because I also feel like that is a heavy way to be countered if somebody kicked it. Like, if you're using that, you obviously needed to use it for something. If somebody was quick on a kick, it would leave you in a really terrible spot inside of PvP situations. Obviously in PvE, that most likely won't happen. So the second ability we're going to be talking about with the Venthyr is Swarming Mist. Now this is one of the reasons why I think it's more of like a tanking covenant than a Frost DK DPS covenant, is the heavy mist surrounds you for 8 seconds, increasing your dodge by 10%, which in PvP probably not going to do very much in terms of damage reduction. I mean, 10% dodge, I mean it is 10% dodge, but in PvP they're going to be getting at your back. Chances are a lot of the abilities hitting you most likely will not be just, you know, light melee attacks. The majority of things hitting you, dealing damage, are not going to be dodgeable, or they're going to lay it into your back most likely. So 10% dodge, not really that great. Now, the part that is beneficial definitely to Frost DKs with Swarming Mist is it deals 207 shadow damage every 1 second to enemies within 10 yards, which that, again, not really that much damage, not a huge DPS gain, not really that important. As a tank, it could definitely help you grant a little bit more threat, let's say in AoE consistency, and being that it's on a 1 minute cooldown, obviously it is a bit weaker than Night Fae when it comes to cooldown timer. So obviously Night Fae, just under that alone, is going to be better just in comparison. Now the last part that is interesting with this spec, now if you were playing like the dual wield breath spec, this part could definitely affect how long or how well you can keep up your breath, being that every time it deals damage, you gain 3 runic power, up to a maximum of 15 runic power, which that is fairly good. It would grant you a little bit of buff on, let's say, your runic power gain if you were playing like a heavy breath spec, but overall, I would still say it wouldn't nearly be as much damage as, let's say, running the obliteration cleave. And that being said, I feel like this talent in comparison to the other two is extremely underwhelming, and that's why you see me standing in the main city testing it out, not nearly putting as much effort into the other characters, the other two Covenant abilities than I would this one, because it just, to me, it just doesn't feel that good. Now, you could say also in PvP that it would potentially grant you a little bit more survivability, granting a little bit more runic power, but being that it also seems to fluctuate based on how many targets there are, I wouldn't really say that it's going to be very good for 2v2 and 3v3, because I really feel like it's going to need the maximum to grant the maximum amount of runic power and grant you that extra runic power to deal more damage, and I just don't feel like the trade-off is going to be worth it compared to the other Covenants. Last up, but certainly not least, we have Kyrian. Now, Kyrian has some interesting avenues that you can kind of go down that allow it to be a little bit stronger than the other Covenants for certain things. Now, as for PvE, the initial ability called File of Serenity, which is something you get by calling out your little steward called Sowen Steward. Little bird comes out, gives you 3 of these potions, which allow you to heal for 20% of your health and remove curses, diseases, poisons, and bleed effects, which really overall is survivability. This is something that the other abilities aren't going to really give you when it comes to, let's say, 1v1 scenarios. Now, Flesh Crafter, obviously over there with Abomination Limb, Flesh Crafter is going to give you like a 3k absorb shield, while this is going to give you 60% health healing. That's going to counter literal most classes bursts and kind of allow you to survive things you normally wouldn't be able to survive using this Covenant. So in terms of 1v1ing people, I'm going to have to give this Covenant specifically the best dueling when it comes to 1v1ing most classes. Now, there are going to be things, let's say arcane mages in general, most likely hunters and things like that, that running Abomination Limb is going to be extremely beneficial for 1v1ing and probably give you a bit more mechanical strength overall than using these guys. But these guys are going to give you that survivability, that extra little niche, that extra little, you know, the extra little heal as you're chasing somebody, let's say across the duel pits, or you're 1v1ing somebody inside of arena. These little potions just give you that extra 20% buff. Obviously, I can't use it on full health. I want to drink it, but they won't let me. So that's going to give you like a nice niche, just kind of like surviving 1v1 against other classes. It is going to give you a bit more healing capability, and on a DK, that extra healing is actually going to go quite far, being that you have to break up cooldowns and heal using those cooldowns and survive to your next cooldowns to heal as long as some of the other classes, such as Rep Paladins and things like that have quite a bit of healing capabilities. So this one, just on that ability alone, I would have to say is better than all the other covenants at 1v1ing other classes for a Frosty K. Just that alone makes it that extreme. It's actually kind of crazy. And then next up, they have an ability called Shackle of Unworthy. Now, this ability is pretty interesting. So it pretty much hits your target, reducing the damage they deal by 5%, which is a little bit of damage mitigation. You can't go wrong there. And dealing 2,500 arcane damage over 14 seconds, which also seems to scale off of my Pillar of Frost. And it seems to scale off of Fallen Crusader, which is pretty cool that it seems you can increase the damage of this ability by throwing up other things and popping cooldowns, which pretty nice. As for the bottom of the ability, it says, while Shackle of the Unworthy is active, on an enemy, your direct damage attacks that spend runes guys, alright, have a 50% chance to spread Shackle Unworthy to a nearby enemy, which is a pretty cool ability. So it does a little bit of increased single target damage, which if you can read that, obviously, it's going to deal quite a bit more single target damage than the other three, which is fairly good. I would like to test this out even further now that I've really kind of dove deep into what's going on over here. Now, while Shackle of the Unworthy is active, your enemy, you take direct damage. Obviously, you spend roots, 50% chance to spread it. Pretty cool, right? Like you spread it, you hit the target, it's going to do a little bit of spread damage, dot damage over time. You got a little bit of extra survivability. So definitely when you combine both of those, this Covenant is going to be quite a bit beefier than the other ones when it comes to 1v1. Like it's almost inarguable at this point that for the majority of fights, this one is going to benefit you more than the other three. But there are a little bit of niches here that I do like. If there is more than one target, obviously you're going to cleave that to the other target. But I did find that once you cleave it to another target, you do have a, I would have to say, a fairly small chance that it's going to cleave back to the original target, which I have seen it happen, but it's also fairly rare that it does happen, which kind of worries me. I maybe with like 5 targets, you could actually cleave quite a bit more DPS if you're spreading it to, let's say, all 5 of the targets within the vicinity as you're just DPSing on the single target. Could actually make this deal a lot more damage than, let's say, just doing it on 2 targets, which is something that I definitely think would be pretty cool for this ability. Kind of like level it out with some of the other ones in terms of cleave damage. So let's go ahead and show you guys what I'm talking about. Now, obviously, like I said before, if you have procs or using cooldowns, it's going to increase the damage of Shackle Unworthy, which is fairly nice to see. Now, we're going to throw up Horse's Winter. We're going to throw up some damage here. I'm going to open up on the target. Now, I'm going to throw in that ability so it starts cleaving. Now, it hasn't cleaved yet. It hasn't cleaved yet. There it goes. It's on the other target. Now, we have about, what, like 9 seconds left on this that it can cleave, and we have quite a bit of obliterates we can lay into it. Now, at some point when it gets close to down, you can actually swap to, let's say, one of the other targets with it, and kind of cross your fingers that it cleaves back to the original target, and then you could actually bounce it back and forth on some of the other ones, which is really cool to see. But overall, in terms of, like, would I play this spec in Mythic Plus over Kyrian Tor? Most likely not. And would I play this spec in PvP over Abomination Limb Arena? Most likely not. But if I was gonna, let's say, duel people seriously, like duel them hardcore, like actually compete in, let's say, 1v1 scenarios, like really want to beat somebody like a geared out Ret Paladin, something like that, I would definitely say this specific Covenant would definitely be beneficial, more beneficial than the other 3 Covenants. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did. Comment down below if you have any questions or you have any ideas with these Covenants that could make them even stronger. I would like to hear, and most likely I'll reply to the comments down below. Remember to subscribe. Next up, I'll probably cover Frosty K legendary items, as there are some interesting ones in there, but the majority of them are kind of rehashed Legion legendaries, which I enjoyed them, but I also hated them all at the same time, because I got bad ones in the beginning, but then I ended up getting the good ones, and then things were okay, but things weren't okay. It was kind of a love-hate relationship there. By the way, what do you guys think about that? Do you like that they rehashed some of them? Were you hoping some kind of new legendaries would come out that were pretty cool? Let me know down in the comments below. And of course, until next time, this was your boy Hazzed.